It is Wednesday, which means it is time for our high school football preview. Winston Salem Journal prep beat writer Marc Pruitt joining me as he does every Wednesday during the high school football season. We will preview Marc's top 3 high school football games for this upcoming Friday. It is rivalry week across the Triad, so we'll actually get into some of the biggest rivalries in the Triad currently right now, and much, much more. It is the Desmond Johnson Show. Let's go.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
Yeah, welcome to the Carolinas. Everywhere you go, the sky is Carolina blue, the finest. Live action, feedback, the city need that. I've been number 1, no cap. Here's the recap. Adrenaline is my addiction. I'm about to relapse. Step on the turf if you want and get your weed whacked. I'm going harder than a martyr on the starter end. It's the heart of man, that's a rap like a cardigan. I'm breaking records, it's 4th and inches, I count the seconds. The over-under's my roar of thunder, my secret weapon. Yeah, the game is to be told. I don't break, I break modes. Follow me on Tobacco Road.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
And it is the Desmond Johnson Show, bringing it to you live every Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. You can catch us on the Tobacco Road Sports Radio YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Tobacco Road Sports Radio. Please rate, subscribe, and like there. The audio will be on the Tobacco Road Podcast Network a little bit later on today. Everything's brought to you by Emergency Responders Credit Union in Winston-Salem. If you are an emergency responder and you're looking for a place to do financial services, go check out ERCR or ERCU, Emergency Responders Credit Union off of Link Road in Winston-Salem. Joining me is Marc Pruitt from the Winston-Salem Journal. Marc, last Friday, we were somewhat off air. It was a lot of big scores from some of the big dogs in the area.
Yep. Not the greatest of weeks, I guess, to be if you're a fan of those teams that won handily, yes, it's probably a lot of fun for you, but for us media type folk, the slate just didn't really match up with us seeing great games, unfortunately. But some great teams put up some great performances and a lot of great individual performances last week. I was noticing as I was going through all the scores and all the information I could find Saturday and Sunday. So
yeah. I was at East Forsyth Reynolds calling that for the East Forsyth Sports Network for Tobacco Road, and East won. Was it 62-6? I think the final was. Was out there. They were running clock in the 4th, and then I didn't know if anyone was going to score more than that. Then I saw Grimsley drop 71 on Southwest Guilford, 71-0. I feel like those two are on a collision course in the playoffs, and it's kind of setting up RPI wise, where depending on what happens over the next 2 weeks, we may see those two teams or two schools as the number 1 and number 2 seed in the West 4A. I'm kind of looking at the other teams that are maybe in contention. Huff is up there as well as there's somebody else. Weddington. Weddington's right there too. So it's gonna be tight.
Weddington, Huff had a big win last week against Mallard Creek.
Yeah.
So I thought that was as impressive as a score I saw across the state last week, because I think a lot of people were talking about that down in Charlotte as, kind of one of the premier games of the year down that way. So
I think they won like 33-0 or something like that. So Huff's always been a perennial contender the past 4 or 5 years. They've kept it going. And you've got like Butler's on the rebuild, Independence is on the rise, kind of Mallard Creek is rebuilding again, but Huff seems to be like the one, and Weddington, primarily Weddington coming out of Charlotte. It's really those two teams to kind of look at in the Triad. It feels like it's Grimsley and East Forsyth in 4A. Mount Tabor, I feel like, is going to have a little run here going forward.
Say about it before it's all said and done, because they really talking to them after the East Forsyth loss. They were still kind of beating themselves up about that, and I went to see them last week against Glenn, and Coach Brown was still saying a lot of the same things. Is we try to put that one behind us, but it's still kind of in our head a little bit. And they had a really big team meeting after the East game, and I think laid a lot of things out that they recognized that they could have done better, should have done better, and maybe picked up that big W. But I think Tabor's going to have something to say about it before it's all said and done.
Yeah, but they've only lost 2 losses, and they were to Grimsley and East Forsyth. So I mean, I think the Grimsley one was Grimsley on the road. I can't remember. We had that game, and of course East came to Mount Tabor and played instant classic 35-28 a couple of weeks back. And I think we all left the box that night thinking, okay, Tabor's they're going to have a say in what's going on in 4A West. It's kind of weird. Normally it's a bunch of Charlotte schools, maybe 1 or 2 up here trying to crack through. And really it feels like this year, Grimsley, East, Mount Tabor, Northern Guilford's undefeated still, and they're heading for a showdown with Grimsley next week, and we'll have that on WCOG in Tobacco Road. Northwest Guilford, I think, has only lost once or twice. I know they lost to Grimsley a couple weeks back.
Even throw West in there.
West Forsyth, yeah, their losses are to Weddington and Tabor, yeah. So there you go.
And I mean, next week's their big matchup with East, and I know Coach Brown and Mount Tabor they're the biggest fans of West Forsyth right now.
Yeah.
Put them up atop the standings and go to a coin flip for all that. But
I asked Coach Wallace. I guess hosted Titans Talk on Monday night for JP, and during the show, it's like if you guys win out, you win the CPC. He was like, no, technically it would be a 3-way tie because I forgot that Tabor beat them. So Tabor beat West. In that scenario, West beat East, East beat Tabor, and it would go to some weird coin flip thing.
Yep, and determine who the number 1 seed for the playoffs would be. And
yeah, see that kind of upsets me a little bit, but
I mean we're getting ahead of our skis a little bit there.
Because we still got this week to go, and it's rivalry week, and anything can happen. Granted, some of these teams on one side of the rivalry maybe be having down years, but again, it's rivalry week. There's no telling what could potentially happen on any given Friday. Give us your game number 1 here, top 3 games here in the Triad for us to be looking after on Friday.
Let's start in Greensboro with Grimsley and Page. This is still kind of the premier. I know a lot of people in Greensboro want to see Page and Grimsley and Dudley play on a regular. Doubt we'll ever get to that point, even with realignment coming. But Page and Grimsley, always a fun time. Grimsley undefeated. We can talk about the offense. We have exhausted the Faison, Brandon Talk, and Mitchell Summers. But the Grimsley defense is getting it done. They have allowed 28 points in the last 6 games. That's crazy. And playing in that conference. And I don't think they're going to have any problems with, kind of looking ahead to next week with the matchup with Northern. Both of them will probably be undefeated heading into that game. But Grimsley and Page is just a big deal around Greensboro, and it brings back a lot of the alums, a lot of the lifers in that area that supports those 2 schools. And current Grimsley AD Evan Fancourt went to Grimsley, played basketball there. His coach there. He's also coached at Page, so he's going to kind of see this from a different angle this year as his first year as the AD. So that should be a fun one, at least, just for the people in Greensboro. And those 2 schools have a lot of history between them and for the city. Yeah,
and they've had some battles over the years. I know for the longest they only played it at Grimsley because it was big enough to hold the crowd. I want to say Jameson Stadium is the largest high school stadium in the state. It seats like 10,000 people at capacity. It's been used for a variety of things, including Greensboro College. They've used it for football as well. And it's one of the few. There may be some others, but I can't think of another. Maybe you can think of one. I can't think of another high school that has 2 separate press boxes, like a visitor side and a home side.
No, I mean, if you want to say Bowman Gray, but they don't really use that for high school football anymore.
Yeah. Back in the day, like early 2000s, I know they still were doing those Carver Parkland games out that way, and I know that Reynolds used Bowman Gray as their stadium for a while, like way back in the day too. Shout out to Coach Joe Davidic and the Reynolds Demons are playing really well. Again, I saw them against East. The score didn't really reflect the fight that they had, and I saw some stills on social media that they're pouring concrete over in Haynes Park for the stadium that should be open. I think they told me in the booth they're trying to be open for spring sports.
The plan, I think I was over there Monday night talking to the AD too, and the plan is to hopefully have some of the spring stuff there this year.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Football in the fall. For sure, unless something catastrophic happens with weather and everything else. But they're just as eager as everybody else to get
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
and get it going.
Get out of Deaton Thompson once and for all. Grimsley Page, so game number 1 on Mark's Big 3. That game is actually the WCOG High School Football Game of the Week, powered by the Grimsley Sports Network and Tobacco Road Sports Radio. Chase Williams and the coach, James Willamie, will be on the call out in Greensboro for Grimsley versus Page. Give me your game number 2, rivalry week, big games here this upcoming Friday in the Triad.
We'll go to Kernersville. I think everybody's going to be talking about this one, and this will be a good opportunity. If you want to do any misdeeds in Kernersville Friday night, it might not have the same impact. East is at Glenn. Might not have the same kind of impact as it did a few years ago in that second round playoff game where if you weren't there by 6 o'clock, you weren't getting in. There was nowhere to sit, stand, park, you name it. Everybody in Kernersville was there.
Yeah.
I don't think this one will have quite the luster, but it's still kids playing against kids they grew up playing with. Now they're playing for different schools, and Glenn's kind of fallen on hard times the last couple seasons, and is really struggling to pick up the pieces, I think, a little bit. Even though they've got some decent players out there, they're just really young. Tommy Green is doing a great job with what he's got. Had a lot of defections from last year. Got a couple of kids in that might be some building blocks for next year, especially with the quarterback, Brady Robinson being one of those, and a really, really good linebacker in Isaiah Buford, who was an all-area team member last season for us as a sophomore. So, but East just has all that firepower. You see him every week, and I don't know that this one will have a good game feel to it, but it'll be fun in the rivalry, and I think it's senior night for the Bobcats. So
yeah, it is.
Bring that extra emotion out, I think, too.
You mentioned that playoff round game. I think it was a second round game or a third round game. I think it was a third round. Yeah, it was a third round game because if I'm not mistaken, Glenn beat Myers Park the week prior at Glenn. And Myers Park was like the largest 4A school by pop, and Glenn was like the smallest. And they had come up to Glenn. That was the Albert Red defense. I think Camden Coleman was the quarterback. Yeah. So that's 2022, I think. 23.
Right. Yeah.
Or not last year. So, but 22. Yeah, 22. That sounds right.
And then when East won the next week, it was Quayshawn returned the
opening kickoff. Yeah, there's a little story behind that too, because there was a lot of smack talk at the beginning of that game, and actually, I think one of the players from Glenn bumped into Q like on the field or something during pregame. I remember me and B-Dot were actually standing on the field talking about something, and we saw it going on, and because B-Dot's actually close to Quayshawn Brown's family, and he was just like, that was the wrong kid to do that to. And then literally I walked up to the press box and we got set up. Q runs the opening kickoff back like 98 yards for a touchdown. Yeah. And that was it. It was like 7-0 was the final. Like the defenses wouldn't let anything else happen after that.
What was fun about that moment, especially for me, was I was at East practice the day before that, and they were working on that exact play, setup, formation, off the kickoff in the stadium with the lights on and everything. And I kind of asked Coach Willard that night, like, okay, this looks a little different. He said, we saw something on film. I was like, okay. And anytime I think that remembering that team, and Quayshawn was just a special talent. Yeah. He was one of those that every time he touched the ball, you thought he was going to get to the house.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's redshirt now at Duke. He's their punt returner. He actually came back for homecoming a couple weeks ago, and I got a chance to interview him during the East Parkland game during halftime. Great kid, great family. Wish him all the best. Wish he wasn't at Duke. Actually, I wish he was, a couple miles down the road to Carolina, but it's okay. It's fine. Still East Forsyth family. Yeah, Q's doing good. And those games, you're right. That playoff game, it was standing room only. Like when it's one of those games where there's people standing around the track because there's no place to sit. Like they don't want to sit. They're just standing around the track watching the game. That was the last East Glen game like that. And we were talking the COVID year that they missed in 2020. The two coaches at the time, they were like, yeah, there would have literally been like double-digit D1 signed like players on both teams. Like, it would have been the biggest East Glen game of all time if they had gotten a chance to play it in the fall like they were supposed to. And East was coming off back-to-back state championships. Glen was like 10-1. Like it was the peak of that rivalry. But it ebbs and flows. It's the K Vegas Cup. East Forsyth Glen will be on the WTOB High School Football Game of the Week. It'll be myself and Hot Rod Funderburk on the call there, live from Glen at the Water Tower. That's a 7 p.m. kickoff on Friday on WTOB and TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com. Give me your third big rivalry game for this week in the Triad, Mark.
This one's been a fun one that's developed over the years, and I'll kind of tell a little story behind some of it. But Reagan will be at Mount Tabor Friday night.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, that's a spicy one.
Reagan still, despite all the injuries to the team this season, they're still kind of right in the thick of things in the CPC. I think right now they're fine in the RPI too, as far as getting a playoff berth. They may have to win one more game, or they might get snuck out. And I think it's even more interesting for them next week against Reynolds, because Reynolds is, I think, got a shot at getting in the playoffs if they can pick up a win as well. And they play Reynolds plays West Forsyth this week, and then plays Reagan next week. But Reagan Tabor was always fun, especially now. I think a couple of the Reagan players from last season are now playing for Mount Tabor, which created a little bad blood. The interesting part of this is when Reagan started to turn the corner. This was, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years ago now. There was a little preview story in the paper about the game. I think it was the regular season finale as well. And Josh McGee was coaching at Reagan. Lamar Marshall was the coach at Mount Tabor at the time. And Lamar was quoted in the paper as saying things like, Mount Tabor doesn't lose to teams like Reagan. And come lo and behold, Reagan beat Mount Tabor on Mount Tabor's home field that night. And as I'm waiting to talk to the team, Coach McGee has his players in a circle. They're doing their little after game breakdown thing where they clap and do the push-ups and stuff like that. And out from his little clipboard, he pulls out a copy of that story and the quote that ran, and ripped it to shreds on the field and threw it down and stomped on it. He's like, yes. That's what happens when people talk bad about Reagan football. It was a very memorable moment, and I think the win got Reagan into the playoffs for the first time in school history. And Coach McGee, I remember Coach McGee said to me after that game, it's the first time we haven't had to pack up our equipment on the Saturday following the last game of the season.
Wow.
So again, this was 8-9 years ago, but that I think the rivalry is still. It's about 10. I think Tabor and Reagan are the closest geographically to one another in the county.
Other than East and Glen, but yeah.
Up through, and the back, you can take the back roads, and it's about an 8-minute drive from
to
Reagan.
Man, that's wild, because I'm learning. Well, I've known, because I've been dealing with the CPC now for a number of years, but there are a number of coaches within the CPC that kind of have like internal rivalries with each other. Like, they don't really talk smack directly to each other, but there's a lot of politicking and stuff going on, like in the back, in terms of like the ADs and like the football coaches and stuff. And it's a trip for me to kind of see it and see it kind of come into play. Reagan Mount Tabor, that's a good one. We do not have that game. We only have, actually, this week we're giving you guys a bunch of games, and the only ones we have this week are literally, let me find it here. East Forsyth versus Glen is the TOB game of the week, like I mentioned, and Grimsley versus Page is the WCOG game of the week. Then we do have Southwest Guilford versus Ragsdale on the Southwest Guilford Sports Network. Max Wallace and Colin Wood will be on the call there. It should be senior night for Southwest Guilford, and head coach Marlon White as well. Before I get you out of here real quick, I wanted to pull up the current standings in the West 4A RPI standings here. And I was surprised, because this just changed at 11:36 this morning, so literally like an hour ago, an hour and some change. I was kind of surprised. Grimsley has moved into the number 1 position at 8-0. Weddington has dropped to 2. They're at 7-0. And as you can see from their RPI, they're literally separated by, it's like 7/100ths or 1,000th of a percent or something like that. It's a fraction. And if anything, Grimsley's about to get a bump, because they're going to play an undefeated Northern Guilford in 2 weeks, who's ranked number 3 right now. Northern Guilford's moved all the way up to number 3 on the RPI here. That game could be a winner takes the 1 seed if they both win this upcoming week. I don't know who Northern Guilford has. Do you know who Northern Guilford has Friday?
I haven't looked at their schedule yet. I was going to look into that.
Now, depending on who they might have, I don't know who they have actually. I know Southwest got Ragsdale. If Grimsley's playing Page, I don't know, but depending on who they play, that might affect that RPI downward somewhat. East Forsyth is at 4 at 8-0. They're going to be taking on Glenn. That might hit them a little bit on RPI because of Glenn's like 2-6 or something like that. So you got Watauga at 5. Watauga, I heard Watauga is about to attempt to do something nuts. They're going to play like 4 football games in like 13 days or whatever to try to catch up.
Yeah, I think one of the ones that that's what this rule, the pushing back the playoffs. I don't know if we can say benefits, but trying to get their games in.
Yeah.
Which they can play 2 games in a week now, which normally you wouldn't do unless you postpone one because of rain or whatever. But trying to miss the ones, I'm guessing they probably missed 2 or 3 at least games.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they're about 3 games behind everybody right now. Well, about 2 games behind everybody right now. So if they can get it all in during this little break when all the other teams are going to be kind of sitting there, I don't know if it helps or hurts Watauga because you're going to play 4 games in like 12 days and you're going to go right into the playoffs where these other teams are going to have a week bye off in a time of the year where you maybe don't want to bye. You kind of want to keep going. But I remember when they had it split out into double classifications, the top seeds were getting buys that first round or whatever. And then really the second round was probably somebody that was like a 5-5 team anyway. So you really kind of got 2 buys before you really got to anybody in the third round. Keep an eye on that. Northwest Guilford is at 7. Huff is sitting at 6. I thought Huff was actually going to be a little higher, but it looks like they're getting hurt by their opponent's win percentage right now. And again, that's gonna tick upwards for Grimsley and East Forsyth. I kind of feel like in the end, it's going to be the winner of Grimsley and Northern Guilford will be the 1 seed. The winner of if East Forsyth beats West Forsyth, who's sitting at 8 right now. If East Forsyth beats West Forsyth next week, East will more than likely be the 2 seed. I don't think they would be any lower than 3. Northern Guilford would drop because they lost to Grimsley. I don't know if Weddington even sees anybody over the next couple of weeks that will be a needle mover to push them up. I just don't know if they have anybody on their schedule that will do that. And then looking at the rest of them, West Forsyth's at 8, Mount Tabor's at 9. You got Mallard Creek at 10. Reagan is sitting at number 12 right now, so looking pretty good RPI wise. If they can win one of those 2 they have coming up, if they win them both, they're in. I would imagine. So you would have East.
I imagine they might be in. They're that high, they might be in already. Unless.
Well, their opponent's win percentage is what's keeping them. They have one of the highest ones. Reagan played Grimsley this year. They already played East this year. They played West, or they're going to play West. Yeah,
they've had a tough. Reagan plays a tough non-conference schedule.
They played Weddington. Yeah. So that's or no, Reagan didn't play Weddington. West did. So yeah, those are helping both those teams out a lot. And again, for West, the only 2 losses they've had this year are to East Forsyth and Weddington. For Tabor, it's Grimsley and East. Reagan's 3 losses: Grimsley, East Forsyth, and they lose to West.
Yes.
West? Yeah. So those, so if you kind of go down the line, you look at who's lost to who and look at the RPI, it's literally following like, okay, well, the teams that lost right underneath them, Huff lost to a South Carolina team opening week of the season, and they've been on a 7-game win streak ever since. But Northwest Guilford, they lost to Grimsley. They lost to, that was somebody, I'm going to say it was somebody in the non-conference. I want to say, no, Northern Guilford. I think they lost to Northern Guilford. So it was Grimsley and Northern Guilford that they lost to, and they're right above them. So, it kind of makes sense. It kind of fits into place. Mallard Creek just lost to Huff. So it's going to be interesting. I don't really know how much home field really, well, it does matter. But those first 6 schools, Grimsley, Weddington, Northern Guilford, East Forsyth, Watauga, and Huff, I don't know how home field would work for Watauga, where they're playing or how that's working out. But I would imagine Grimsley, Weddington, East, and Huff and Northern would all like to just host their home games going forward for the playoffs. So it's going to be super tight over the next 2 weeks. And these games have a lot of meaning going forward. So we'll keep an eye on those as well. Derek Pauly checking in, enjoying the show. We appreciate you checking in, Derek. Anything you want to say before we get out of here for this Wednesday, man?
It's going to be fun. Friday, fun next week and a half, I think, with everything that's going on. A lot of the other state playoff tournaments, events are going on, volleyball. Golf regionals were yesterday, and they'll take place next Monday and Tuesday at Pinehurst. Cross country regional is this weekend in Kernersville at Ivy Beeson Sports Complex, or Ivy Redmond Sports Complex, excuse me. So there's a lot going on right now for high school sports, and really, really looking forward to this week's games and next week's games, especially, and then we'll kind of see where everything falls into place.
I may get he is the baseball coach for East Forsyth, Drew Dull, but he's also my RPI guy. He's the one that usually tells me that last week of the season, he already has it written out, like who is what in the seeds based off of predictions on who won or whatever. And the past 3 years he's done it, he's been pretty much spot on. Joe Serrera used to kind of do it a little bit too. He kind of had an idea of where everybody was, but Drew knows mathematically. He's a math teacher at East Forsyth, so he knows exactly like what's going to affect what, because he wants to know where East is going to be, and the coaches want to know too. So they already have it. If East wins, this is probably where their RPI is going to be. This will be what they're seeded. This is where we'll be playing in 2 weeks, that kind of thing. And he'll know who the 1 seed is going to be, the 2 seed and stuff. So I might ask Drew if he wants to hop on and talk a little RPI with us once we get through the regular season, because we'll have that 1 week where we won't have any games there, and we can dissect how they got to everything. So I'm gonna let Mark go, because I know Mark's got like 40 schools he's got to cover in the Triad right now. So I'm gonna let him go ahead and do that. We'll be back Friday with a brand new episode of the Desmond Johnson Show. The NBA started last night. The Hornets are actually taking on the Houston Rockets tonight on our through our production Tobacco Road. You can hear it in the Triad on WWBG 1470 AM tonight at 8 p.m. for the tip-off. Looking forward to that. We'll talk about the NFL. Andy Dalton was in an accident yesterday. We'll get into all that and more on Friday. But enjoy the games on Friday, brought to you by Tobacco Road. We'll see you out there, and we'll see Mark next week. We'll see you guys later.